Boss fires autistic employee, then discovers he's the CEO's nephew. It was a typical Monday morning at Brighton Industries, a bustling tech company housed in a gleaming high-rise in the city's financial district. Employees moved briskly between cubicles, coffee cups in hand, ready to tackle the week ahead. Among them was Daniel, a young man in his early 20s with a nervous but focused demeanor. Clutching a folder filled with neatly organized documents, he made his way to his desk in the corner of the open office floor. Daniel was a recent hire in the analytics department. Despite being on the autism spectrum, he was exceptionally skilled in data analysis, his sharp mind capable of uncovering patterns and insights others often overlooked. However, his social interactions were awkward, and he often struggled to interpret unspoken rules and cues in the workplace. As he settled into his chair, Daniel pulled out a spreadsheet he had been working on over the weekend. He reviewed it meticulously, double-checking the numbers and annotations. The data was part of a quarterly report for an important client, and Daniel had spent hours ensuring it was flawless. It was his way of compensating for the nagging feeling that he didn't quite fit in with the rest of the team. But not everyone at Brighton Industries appreciated Daniel's talents. His manager, Mr. Carter, had a reputation for being impatient and results-driven to a fault. He valued efficiency and quick turnarounds over careful precision, and he found Daniel's meticulous approach to be a hindrance rather than an asset. Over the past month, Mr. Carter had grown increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as Daniel's quirks and slow pace. That morning, Mr. Carter stormed onto the floor, his presence as commanding as ever. His sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on Daniel, who was hunched over his desk, deeply engrossed in his work. "Daniel," Mr. Carter barked, striding toward him. "A word in my office." "No." Daniel flinched at the abrupt tone but quickly gathered his folder and followed his manager down the hallway. The other employees exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension. Inside Mr. Carter's office, the atmosphere was tense. The blinds were drawn, and the desk was cluttered with papers and half-empty coffee cups. Mr. Carter gestured for Daniel to sit, but his tone lacked any semblance of warmth. "Daniel," he began, his voice firm, "I've reviewed your recent work, and I have to say, it's not meeting my expectations." Daniel blinked, confused. He had been confident in the accuracy and depth of his analysis. "But I double-checked everything," he said quietly. "The data is correct." Mr. Carter leaned forward, his frustration evident. "It's not just about the data. It's about efficiency, adaptability, and teamwork. You take too long to complete tasks, and your inability to communicate effectively with the team is holding us back." Daniel's heart sank. He had always tried his best to adapt, but social interactions didn't come naturally to him. "But I thought I was contributing," he said, his voice barely audible. Mr. Carter sighed, his patience wearing thin. "Look, Daniel, this isn't a good fit. I've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. "But I need this job," he said, his voice breaking. "I've been working hard." "I'm sorry," Mr. Carter said curtly, though his tone lacked any real empathy. "You can collect your things and leave by the end of the day." Daniel stood slowly, clutching his folder like a lifeline. Without another word, he left the office, his mind racing. The stares of his coworkers felt heavier than ever as he returned to his desk to pack his belongings. As Daniel was clearing out his desk, a man entered the office. He was tall and silver-haired, with an air of quiet authority. It was Mr. Brighton, the CEO and founder of the company. Despite his wealth and status, Mr. Brighton was known for his hands-on approach and genuine care for his employees. He often walked the floor unannounced, taking the time to greet his staff and ask about their work. Today, however, his visit had a specific purpose. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Daniel, who was struggling to fit his laptop into his bag. Mr. Brighton frowned and approached him. "Daniel?" he said gently. "What's going on?" Daniel looked up, startled to see the CEO standing in front of him. "But I've been let go," he said, his voice trembling. "Mr. Carter said I wasn't a good fit." Mr. Brighton's frown deepened. He had been keeping tabs on Daniel's progress since the young man was hired, and he knew the challenges Daniel faced as someone on the autism spectrum. But he also knew about Daniel's incredible analytical skills and his potential to bring value to the company. "Come with me," Mr. Brighton said, his tone leaving no room for argument. In the privacy of Mr. Brighton's office, Daniel sat nervously across from the CEO, his belongings still clutched in his arms. Mr. Brighton leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Daniel," he began, "I know you face some challenges here, but I also know you're incredibly talented. I've seen the reports you've worked on, and they're some of the most thorough analyses we've ever had." Daniel's eyes widened. He hadn't realized Mr. Brighton had been paying attention to his work. "Thank you," he said quietly. "What exactly did Mr. Carter say to you?" Mr. Brighton asked. Daniel hesitated, unsure of how much he should share. But the kind expression on the CEO's face encouraged him to speak honestly. He recounted the conversation, his voice faltering as he described Mr. Carter's criticism and the dismissal. Mr. Brighton listened intently, his frown deepening as the story unfolded. When Daniel finished, the CEO leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as he processed the information. "This is unacceptable," Mr. Brighton said finally, his tone firm. "No employee should be treated this way, especially not someone with your skills and potential." Daniel looked at him, hope flickering in his eyes. What does that mean?" "It means you're not going anywhere," Mr. Brighton said with a small smile. "I'm reinstating you immediately, and I'll personally ensure you get the support you need to thrive here." Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes, and he quickly wiped them away. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I'll work harder. I promise." "It's not about working harder," Mr. Brighton said gently. "It's about creating an environment where you can succeed. And that starts with holding people like Mr. Carter accountable." The next morning, Mr. Brighton called an emergency meeting with the senior management team. Mr. Carter entered the boardroom confidently, unaware of the storm brewing. But as the CEO addressed the room, it quickly became clear that this was no ordinary meeting. "I've been made aware of an incident involving one of our employees," Mr. Brighton began, his voice calm but authoritative. "Daniel, who is part of our analytics team, was terminated yesterday without just cause." Mr. Carter's confidence faltered, his posture stiffening. "Sir, I made that decision based on his performance." "Enough," Mr. Brighton interrupted, his tone sharp. "I've reviewed Daniel's work personally, and it's exceptional. What concerns me is your lack of understanding and empathy. As a leader, your job is to support your team, not to dismiss them because they don't fit into your narrow definition of efficiencies." The room fell silent, the weight of Mr. Brighton's words hanging heavily in the air. Mr. Carter opened his mouth to respond but quickly closed it, realizing there was nothing he could say to defend his actions. "I want to make this very clear," Mr. Brighton continued. "This company values diversity in all forms, including neurodiversity. If any of you cannot uphold that standard, you have no place here." The silence in the boardroom was palpable. Mr. Carter shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the usually confident manager now visibly rattled. Mr. Brighton's eyes swept across the room, ensuring his message had landed with the weight it deserved. Effective immediately, Mr. Brighton continued, his voice firm, "Daniel is reinstated, and I will personally oversee the adjustments needed to ensure his success here at Brighton Industries. Additionally, I expect all managers to attend a workshop on neurodiversity and inclusive workplace practices." There's no excuse for the treatment Daniel received. Mr. Carter cleared his throat, attempting to salvage his position. "Sir, if I may, I only acted in what I believed was the company's best interest. Daniel's performance, while precise, was slow, and in our fast-paced environment, that can create bottlenecks." Mr. Brighton leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Mr. Carter, our company's best interest isn't measured by speed alone. It's measured by the quality of our work and the values we uphold. Daniel's attention to detail is a strength, not a weakness, and it's our responsibility as leaders to leverage those strengths." Mr. Carter opened his mouth to respond but thought better of it. He simply nodded, his face pale. "This meeting is adjourned," Mr. Brighton said, standing. "But let me leave you with this. If anyone here thinks they can disregard the importance of treating employees with respect, you're free to resign." I won't tolerate it. As the room emptied, Mr. Carter remained seated, his mind racing. He knew he was on thin ice, and if he wanted to keep his position, he would need to make some serious changes, not just to his management style, but to how he viewed his team. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to his desk, unsure of how his colleagues would react to his reinstatement. To his surprise, several co-workers approached him throughout the day, offering words of encouragement. "I'm glad you're back," said Lisa, a senior analyst who had always admired Daniel's work ethic. "Your reports are some of the best I've seen." "Yeah," added another colleague, Mark. "Carter's a jerk, but not everyone here is like that. We're lucky to have you." Daniel felt a warmth he hadn't expected. For the first time, he realized that not everyone viewed him through the same narrow lens as Mr. Carter. There were people who saw his value, and that recognition gave him a newfound sense of confidence. Over the next few weeks, changes began to take shape at Brighton Industries. Mr. Brighton followed through on his promise, implementing new policies to create a more inclusive workplace. Training sessions on neurodiversity were held, and managers were encouraged to tailor their approaches to the unique needs of their team members. Daniel was also assigned a mentor, Lisa, who helped him navigate the social aspects of the workplace. She provided guidance on everything from communicating with coworkers to managing expectations, and her support made a world of difference. "You're not alone in this," Lisa told him one day as they reviewed a project. "Everyone has something they struggle with. The key is finding ways to work through it together." Daniel nodded, her words resonating deeply. For the first time, he felt like he had a place at Brighton Industries, not just as an employee, but as part of a team. Despite the progress, Mr. Carter remained distant. While he had attended the mandatory training sessions and made an effort to be more respectful, it was clear that he still struggled to fully embrace the changes. Daniel noticed the tension but chose to focus on his work, letting his results speak for themselves. One day, a major project came across the analytics team's desk. It was a high-stakes contract with a prestigious client, and the report would require both speed and precision. Mr. Carter, still eager to prove himself, took the lead on the project but quickly realized he was in over his head. The data was complex, with multiple layers of variables that required careful analysis. After several hours of struggling to make sense of it, Mr. Carter reluctantly approached Daniel. "Daniel," he said, his tone begrudging but sincere, "I could use your help on this report. Your attention to detail, well, it's exactly what we need." Daniel looked up from his desk, surprised by the request. He could hear the effort it took for Mr. Carter to admit he needed help, and while part of him wanted to decline out of spite, he knew that wasn't who he was. "Of course," Daniel said simply, standing and following Mr. Carter to the conference room. The two of them spent the next several hours working side by side. At first, the atmosphere was tense, but as Daniel explained his thought process and pointed out key insights in the data, Mr. Carter began to see him in a new light. "You're really good at this," Mr. Carter admitted, his tone softer than usual. "I didn't realize how much I was missing before." Daniel glanced at him, unsure of how to respond. "I just like finding patterns," he said. "It makes sense to me." "Well, I'm glad you're here," Mr. Carter said. "This report would have been a disaster without you." When the project was completed and presented to the client, it was met with resounding praise. The client was so impressed with the analysis that they not only signed the contract but also recommended Brighton Industries to several of their partners. The success of the project was a turning point for Mr. Carter. He began to see Daniel not as a liability but as an asset, and his attitude toward him shifted. While their relationship was far from perfect, there was a newfound respect that hadn't existed before. Meanwhile, Mr. Brighton kept a close eye on Daniel's progress. One afternoon, he called Daniel into his office for a meeting. "I've been hearing great things about your work," Mr. Brighton said, his tone warm. "That project you worked on with Mr. Carter was a huge success." "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice quiet but proud. "I wanted to tell you something," Mr. Brighton continued. "When I hired you, it wasn't just because of your skills, though those are impressive. It was because I saw potential in you, Daniel. And I'm so glad you've had the chance to show everyone else what I already knew." Daniel felt a lump in his throat, the CEO's words touching a part of him he rarely let others see. "Thank you," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have one more thing to tell you," Mr. Brighton said with a smile. "Do you remember when I first met you during the interview process? I told you that Brighton Industries is like a family. Well, I meant that quite literally. I'm your uncle." Daniel froze, his mind struggling to process the revelation. My uncle?" Mr. Brighton nodded, his smile softening. "Your mother was my sister. I lost touch with her years ago, but when I saw your name on the application, I knew it had to be you. I didn't say anything before because I wanted you to earn your place here on your own merits, and you have." Daniel's heart raced, a mix of emotions flooding through him. He had always wondered about his extended family, but he never imagined finding a connection like this. "I don't know what to say," Daniel admitted, his voice shaking. "You don't have to say anything," Mr. Brighton said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Just know that you're not alone anymore. You've got family here, and I couldn't be prouder of you." From that day forward, Daniel's life at Brighton Industries transformed. With the support of his uncle, his co-workers, and even Mr. Carter, he thrived in his role, proving time and again that his unique perspective was an invaluable asset. As Daniel walked through the office each day, he no longer felt like an outsider. He had found his place, not just in the company, but in a family he never knew he had. And as he looked toward the future, he knew that the possibilities were endless. The news of Daniel being the CEO's nephew spread like wildfire throughout Brighton Industries. Some employees speculated quietly at first, while others approached Daniel to congratulate him. While Daniel appreciated their kind words, he couldn't shake the mixed feelings it stirred within him. Would people now see him as someone who earned his place through merit, or would they reduce his success to mere nepotism? Lisa was the first to notice the unease in his demeanor. "You've been quiet all day," she said as they sat in the break room during lunch. "What's going on?" Daniel hesitated, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. "It's just, everyone knows now. About Mr. Brighton being my uncle. I feel like people are looking at me differently." Lisa leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Daniel, no one can deny the work you've put in here. Your skills speak for themselves. People might talk, but that doesn't change the fact that you've earned your place." Daniel nodded slowly, though her words didn't fully ease his doubts. "I just don't want them to think I've been handed everything." "Then show them," Lisa said with a smile. "Keep doing what you've been doing, working hard, being yourself. The people who matter will see the truth." As the weeks passed, Daniel took Lisa's advice to heart. He threw himself into his work with renewed focus, tackling every project with the same meticulous care that had become his hallmark. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Even the most skeptical employees began to recognize his value, and the whispers about his connection to Mr. Brighton gradually faded. But Daniel wasn't content to simply prove himself. He wanted to make a lasting impact, not just for himself, but for others like him who struggled to find acceptance in the workplace. Inspired by his own experiences, he approached Mr. Brighton with an idea. "Uncle, I mean Mr. Brighton," Daniel said, catching himself as he stepped into the CEO's office one afternoon. "I've been thinking about something." Mr. Brighton looked up from his desk, his expression curious. "What's on your mind, Daniel?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I want to start an initiative to support neurodiverse employees at Brighton Industries. A program that offers mentorship, training, and resources to help them succeed." Mr. Brighton's face lit up with approval. "That's an excellent idea, Daniel. What did you have in mind?" "I was thinking we could create the mentorship program, similar to what Lisa has done for me," Daniel explained. "And maybe workshops to educate employees about neurodiversity, so they understand how to work with people who think differently." Mr. Brighton nodded, clearly impressed. "I love it. Let's make it happen." The initiative, which Daniel named Spectrum of Success, launched within a month. It quickly became a cornerstone of Brighton Industries culture, drawing praise from employees and industry peers alike. The mentorship program paired neurodiverse employees with supportive colleagues, while the workshops fostered a deeper understanding and appreciation for diverse ways of thinking. Lisa volunteered to be one of the first mentors, and several other employees followed suit. Even Mr. Carter, who had initially struggled with the concept, became an advocate for the program after seeing the positive changes it brought to the workplace. "This program has taught me a lot," Mr. Carter admitted during one of the workshops. "It's not about making people fit into a box. It's about creating an environment where everyone can thrive." Daniel was humbled by the program's success, but the real reward came from seeing the impact it had on others. One employee, a data entry specialist named Emily, approached him after a workshop with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "I've always felt like I didn't belong here, but now I feel like I have a place." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You do belong," he said, "and I'm glad we could show you that." As the program flourished, so did Daniel's confidence. He began taking on more leadership roles within the company, spearheading projects and mentoring new hires. His unique perspective and unwavering dedication made him a natural leader, and his colleagues respected him for his authenticity. One day, Mr. Brighton called Daniel into his office. "I've been watching you closely, Daniel," he said, his tone warm but serious. "And I think it's time we talked about your future here." Daniel's heart raced. "My future?" Mr. Brighton nodded. "You've grown so much since you started here, and you've proven yourself to be an invaluable asset to this company. I'd like to offer you a promotion to senior analyst." Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief. "Senior analyst? Are you sure?" "I'm very sure," Mr. Brighton said with a smile. "You've earned it, Daniel. This is just the beginning of what I know you're capable of." Tears pricked the corners of Daniel's eyes as he nodded. "Thank you. I won't let you down." The promotion marked a turning point in Daniel's career. With his new role came greater responsibility, but also greater opportunities to make a difference. He continued to lead the Spectrum of Success initiative, expanding its reach and inspiring other companies to adopt similar programs. One afternoon, as Daniel was preparing a presentation for a conference on workplace inclusivity, Lisa stopped by his desk. "Hey," she said, leaning against the cubicle wall. "You're becoming a bit of a celebrity, you know?" Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Hardly. I'm just trying to do my part." "Well, you're doing an amazing job," Lisa said. "And I couldn't be prouder of you." Daniel smiled, her words filling him with a sense of accomplishment he had never thought possible. "Thanks, Lisa. That means a lot." The conference was a resounding success. Daniel's presentation, titled "Embracing Neurodiversity: The Key to Innovation," received a standing ovation from the audience. He spoke passionately about his journey, the challenges he had faced, and the importance of creating inclusive workplaces. As he stepped off the stage, several attendees approached him to share their own stories and thank him for his advocacy. Among them was a young man who introduced himself as Alex. "Your story really spoke to me," Alex said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've been struggling to find a job because of my autism, but hearing you gives me hope." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Alex's shoulder. "Don't give up," he said. "You have so much to offer, and there are people out there who will see that. Just keep trying, and don't be afraid to reach out for support." Back at Brighton Industries, Daniel's success was celebrated by his colleagues and his uncle alike. Mr. Brighton called a company-wide meeting to recognize Daniel's achievements and thank him for his contributions. "Daniel has shown us all what it means to persevere," Mr. Brighton said, his voice filled with pride. "He's not just an incredible analyst, he's a leader, an innovator, and a reminder of the power of inclusion." The room erupted in applause, and Daniel felt his face flush with a mix of pride and humility. As he looked around the room, he saw the faces of his colleagues, some of whom had once doubted him, but now looked at him with admiration. In that moment, Daniel realized just how far he had come. From a young man struggling to find his place in the workplace to a leader making a difference, his journey had been anything but easy. But it was a journey he wouldn't trade for anything, because it had brought him to where he was meant to be. As Daniel walked back to his desk, Max, his uncle's loyal dog, trotted over from Mr. Brighton's office. The dog nudged Daniel's leg with his nose, and Daniel knelt down to scratch behind his ears. "Hey, Max," he said with a smile. "Guess what? We did it." Max wagged his tail as if he understood. And as Daniel looked around the office, the place that had once felt so daunting but now felt like home. He knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. Life at Brighton Industries had transformed, and Daniel had become a central figure in the company. The Spectrum of Success initiative not only elevated Daniel's confidence but also reshaped the culture of the workplace. Employees now approached each other with a renewed sense of respect and curiosity, and managers became more conscious of how they supported their teams. It was a revolution in every sense, one sparked by Daniel's perseverance and Mr. Brighton's belief in him. Despite all this, Daniel still carried the weight of proving himself. He had achieved so much, but in quiet moments, doubt crept into his mind. Was it enough? Did people truly see him for who he was, or did his family connections still overshadow his accomplishments? One morning, Daniel received an email that took him by surprise. It was an invitation to speak at a global conference on workplace diversity and inclusion. The email was from a prominent organization that had heard about the success of Spectrum of Success and wanted Daniel to share his story on an international stage. Daniel's hands trembled as he read the email. Speaking at a conference was a far cry from running analytics or mentoring employees. It meant standing in front of hundreds, possibly thousands, of people and bearing his soul. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. He forwarded the email to Mr. Brighton, adding a simple message: "Should I do this?" Minutes later, his phone buzzed with a reply: "Absolutely. You were born to do this." Daniel smiled, though the anxiety still churned in his stomach. He knew he couldn't pass up the opportunity. This was his chance to make an even bigger impact. The weeks leading up to the conference were a whirlwind of preparation. Daniel worked closely with Lisa to craft his speech, poring over drafts late into the night. She pushed him to be honest and vulnerable, encouraging him to share not just the triumphs but also the struggles that had shaped his journey. "People don't just want to hear about your successes," Lisa said during one of their late-night brainstorming sessions. "They want to know how you got there. The mistakes, the setbacks, the moments you wanted to quit. That's what makes your story powerful." Daniel nodded, her words resonating deeply. He decided to include a story about his first day at Brighton Industries, the overwhelming anxiety, the self-doubt, and the small victory of completing his first report. It was a reminder of how far he'd come. The day of the conference arrived, and Daniel found himself standing backstage, his heart pounding in his chest. The auditorium was packed, the buzz of conversation filling the air as attendees waited for the next speaker. Daniel peeked out from behind the curtain and immediately felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about him, it was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Mr. Brighton and Lisa had flown out to support him, sitting in the front row with proud smiles. Seeing their familiar faces gave Daniel a surge of courage. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and stepped onto the stage. The applause was thunderous as Daniel approached the podium. He gripped the edges tightly, his palms damp with sweat. For a moment, he stood there in silence, letting the noise die down. Then he began to speak. "Good morning," Daniel said, his voice steady but quiet. "My name is Daniel, and I want to share a story with you. It's not just about my journey, but about the importance of seeing people, not just their labels, but their potential." He paused, scanning the crowd. "When I was hired at Brighton Industries, I was excited but also terrified. I didn't know if I could keep up or if I'd ever truly fit in. You see, I'm on the autism spectrum. And while that gives me strengths, like attention to detail and a love of patterns, it also comes with challenges." Daniel went on to describe the hurdles he had faced, the misunderstandings, the self-doubt, and the moment he thought he had lost everything when Mr. Carter fired him. He spoke about the turning point when Mr. Brighton stepped in, recognizing his potential and giving him a second chance. "Mr. Brighton didn't just give me a job," Daniel said, his voice filled with emotion. "He gave me a purpose. He showed me that I could belong, and that my differences weren't weaknesses, they were strengths." The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. "But this isn't just my story," Daniel continued. "It's the story of countless individuals who are overlooked because they don't fit the mold. And it's up to all of us to change that. We have to create spaces where people can thrive, not despite their differences, but because of them." He ended his speech with a call to action, urging companies to adopt inclusive practices and embrace the value of neurodiversity. The room erupted in applause, the standing ovation lasting several minutes. Daniel's heart swelled with pride as he stepped off the stage, overwhelmed by the response. Backstage, Lisa and Mr. Brighton were waiting for him, their faces beaming with pride. "You were amazing," Lisa said, pulling him into a hug. "I'm so proud of you." "You've outdone yourself, Daniel," Mr. Brighton added, shaking his hand. "I knew you could do it." Daniel smiled, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged, not just at Brighton Industries, but in the world. In the months that followed, Daniel's speech became a catalyst for change. Companies around the globe reached out to Brighton Industries, eager to learn more about the Spectrum of Success initiative. Daniel found himself in a new role as an advocate, traveling to different organizations to help them implement similar programs. Despite his busy schedule, Daniel remained grounded. He continued to mentor employees at Brighton Industries, ensuring the program's success at home. He also made time for his personal life, nurturing the relationships that had supported him through his journey. One evening, as he walked by the lake near the estate, Max trotted beside him, his tail wagging happily. Daniel felt a sense of peace, the chaos of his earlier life now a distant memory. When he returned to the house, Mr. Brighton was waiting for him in the study. "Daniel," he said, gesturing for him to sit. "I've been thinking about the future of this company, and I believe you have a key role to play in it." Daniel tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" "I'm planning to step back from my day-to-day responsibilities," Mr. Brighton said. "And I'd like you to take on a leadership position, something that allows you to shape the direction of the company." Daniel's eyes widened. "You want me to be a leader?" "I don't just want it," Mr. Brighton said with a smile. "I believe you're ready for it. You've already proven that you can inspire change and bring out the best in people. This company needs someone like you." Daniel hesitated, the weight of the offer sinking in. But as he thought about his journey, the challenges he had overcome and the impact he had made, he realized he was ready. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. Daniel's new role marked the beginning of an exciting chapter at Brighton Industries. As a leader, he continued to champion inclusion and innovation, ensuring the company remained a trailblazer in both its industry and its culture. His story inspired employees and clients alike, proving that diversity wasn't just a value, it was a strength. And as Daniel looked toward the future, he knew that his journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face and mountains to climb, but he was ready for them. With the support of his team, his family, and his own unwavering determination, he knew he could achieve anything. For Daniel, the boy who once doubted his place in the world, life had become a testament to the power of resilience, compassion, and the belief that everyone has something valuable to offer. As Daniel stepped into his new role as a leader at Brighton Industries, he found himself navigating uncharted territory. His new responsibilities included overseeing teams across multiple departments, mentoring junior staff, and driving the company's strategic initiatives. It was challenging, but it was also deeply fulfilling. For the first time, Daniel felt like his voice truly mattered, not just to his coworkers, but to the future of the company. One of his first initiatives was to expand the Spectrum of Success program to include mentorship opportunities for all employees, not just those who were neurodiverse. Daniel believed that everyone could benefit from guidance and support, and he wanted to create a culture where employees felt empowered to learn from one another. The program quickly gained traction. Employees who had once felt isolated or overlooked began to thrive under the guidance of their mentors. Productivity soared, and the company's reputation as a leader in workplace inclusivity grew stronger than ever. But not everyone embraced the changes with open arms. Some senior executives viewed the new initiatives as a distraction, believing they took focus away from the company's bottom line. Among them was Mr. Carter, who had never fully warmed to Daniel's leadership despite their improved working relationship. One afternoon, Mr. Carter requested a meeting with Daniel. The two of them sat across from each other in Daniel's office, the atmosphere tense. "Daniel," Mr. Carter began, his tone measured, "I wanted to discuss some concerns I've been hearing from other executives." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What kind of concerns?" There's a sense that we've been prioritizing inclusivity initiatives over our core business objectives, Mr. Carter said. While I understand the importance of these programs, we can't lose sight of what makes this company successful, our ability to deliver results. Daniel took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Mr. Carter, I appreciate your perspective, but I don't see these initiatives as separate from our business objectives. In fact, I believe they're directly tied to our success. When employees feel supported and valued, they perform better. And when we embrace diversity, we foster innovation. Mr. Carter frowned, clearly unconvinced. I'm not saying the programs don't have merit, but there needs to be a balance. We can't afford to let sentimentality cloud our judgment. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. This isn't about sentimentality. It's about building a company that thrives because of its people, not in spite of them. If we can't create an environment where everyone can succeed, then we're failing, not just as a business, but as leaders. The room fell silent, the weight of Daniel's words hanging in the air. Mr. Carter studied him for a moment, then stood. Fair enough, he said, though his tone was clipped. But I hope you understand the importance of results. At the end of the day, that's what will keep this company afloat. Daniel nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Daniel focused on proving that inclusivity and profitability weren't mutually exclusive. He spearheaded a project to revamp the company's product line, bringing together a diverse team of employees to brainstorm ideas. The result was a groundbreaking product that not only exceeded revenue projections but also received industry-wide acclaim for its innovation. The success of the project silenced many of Daniel's critics, but it didn't completely erase the skepticism of people like Mr. Carter. Daniel knew he still had work to do to win them over, but he was determined to stay true to his vision. One evening, as Daniel was leaving the office, he found Mr. Brighton waiting for him by the elevator. The older man smiled warmly, his hands tucked into the pockets of his tailored suit. "Heading home?" Mr. Brighton asked. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, it's been a long day. I heard about the success of your latest project," Mr. Brighton said as they stepped into the elevator. "You've done an incredible job." "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice humble. "But it was a team effort?" Mr. Brighton chuckled. "That's what makes you a great leader, Daniel. You understand the value of collaboration." As the elevator descended, Mr. Brighton's expression grew thoughtful. "I know things haven't been easy for you," he said. "There are always going to be people who resist change, especially when it challenges the way they've always done things. But you've handled it with grace, and I'm proud of you." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. "That means a lot, Uncle," he said softly. "I just want to make a difference." "And you are," Mr. Brighton said. "Don't ever doubt that." The following month, Brighton Industries hosted its annual company retreat, a weekend event designed to foster team building and innovation. This year's retreat was held at a lakeside resort, and Daniel was tasked with leading one of the workshops. The theme of the workshop was Breaking Barriers, Embracing Diversity in the Workplace. Daniel prepared meticulously, drawing on his own experiences and the success of the Spectrum of Success program. He wanted the session to be not only informative but also inspiring. When the day of the workshop arrived, the room was packed with employees from across the company. Daniel stood at the front of the room, his heart pounding as he surveyed the crowd. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Today, I want to talk about what it means to truly embrace diversity, not just as a buzzword, but as a core value." He spoke about the challenges he had faced as someone on the autism spectrum, sharing stories of both triumph and struggle. He highlighted the importance of creating spaces where everyone felt valued, regardless of their differences. "The truth is, diversity isn't just about checking boxes or meeting quotas," Daniel said. "It's about recognizing the unique strengths that each person brings to the table. It's about seeing people, not just their labels, but their potential." As he spoke, Daniel noticed several employees nodding in agreement, their expressions thoughtful. Even Mr. Carter, who was seated near the back of the room, seemed engaged, his usual skepticism replaced by a quiet attentiveness. When the workshop ended, the room erupted in applause. Several employees approached Daniel afterward to thank him for his insights, sharing how his words had resonated with them. "I've been at this company for 10 years, one employee said, "and I've never felt more inspired. Thank you for reminding us why we're here." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. Moments like this reminded him why he had fought so hard to create change. That evening, as the sun set over the lake, the employees gathered around a bonfire. Laughter and conversation filled the air, the camaraderie palpable. Daniel sat with Lisa and Mr. Brighton, a sense of peace settling over him. "You've done something remarkable here, Daniel," Mr. Brighton said, his voice filled with pride. "This company is better because of you." Lisa nodded, raising her glass. "To Daniel," she said, "the leader we didn't know we needed but are so lucky to have." Daniel felt his cheeks flush as everyone around the bonfire raised their glasses in his honor. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I couldn't have done any of this without all of you." As the night wore on, Daniel reflected on how far he had come. From a young man unsure of his place in the world to a leader making a difference, his journey had been anything but ordinary. But it was a journey he wouldn't trade for anything. Because in the end, it wasn't just about finding his place, it was about creating a place where everyone could belong. As the retreat wrapped up, the energy among the employees at Brighton Industries was electric. The bonds formed during the weekend seemed to reinvigorate the entire company. People were talking about new ideas, innovative collaborations, and ways to make the workplace even more inclusive. Daniel returned to the office with a sense of pride and purpose, knowing he had helped spark that momentum. But he was also keenly aware of the challenges that still lay ahead. While the Spectrum of Success program and the retreat had created positive change, there were still pockets of resistance within the company. Some senior executives viewed the new initiatives as temporary trends rather than foundational shifts. Daniel knew that sustaining the momentum would require persistence and creativity. One afternoon, Daniel received an unexpected email from the CEO of a prominent tech firm. The subject line read, "Collaboration Opportunity, Inclusion in the Tech Industry." Curious, Daniel opened the email and began to read. The CEO, a woman named Eleanor Park, explained that she had been following Brighton Industries' progress in fostering inclusivity and was inspired by the Spectrum of Success program. She wanted to partner with Brighton Industries to create a larger initiative that would promote inclusivity across the tech industry. Daniel's heart raced as he read her proposal. This was exactly the kind of opportunity he had dreamed of, an opportunity to make a broader impact beyond Brighton Industries. He immediately forwarded the email to Mr. Brighton with a note, "We need to discuss this." The following day, Daniel and Mr. Brighton met in the CEO's office to review the proposal. Eleanor's vision was ambitious but aligned perfectly with Brighton Industries' values. She proposed a series of workshops, conferences, and mentorship programs that would bring together leaders from various companies to share best practices and drive industry-wide change. "This could be huge," Daniel said, his excitement evident. "It's a chance to show that inclusivity isn't just a moral imperative, it's a business advantage." Mr. Brighton nodded thoughtfully. "I agree. And you're the perfect person to lead this initiative." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Me? Of course," Mr. Brighton said with a smile. "You've already proven that you're capable of driving change within our company. Now it's time to take that vision to a larger stage." Daniel hesitated, the weight of the responsibility sinking in. But as he thought about everything he had accomplished so far, he realized he was ready. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "Let's make it happen." The partnership with Eleanor's company, Park Tech Solutions, was announced with much fanfare. The initiative, dubbed Inclusion in Innovation, quickly gained traction, drawing attention from media outlets and industry leaders. Daniel and Eleanor became the faces of the movement, traveling across the country to speak at conferences and lead workshops. Their first major event was a summit held in San Francisco, bringing together hundreds of executives, managers, and employees from tech companies of all sizes. Daniel prepared tirelessly for his keynote speech, determined to make an impact. When the day of the summit arrived, Daniel stood backstage, feeling a familiar mix of nerves and excitement. Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're going to be amazing," she said. "Just speak from the heart." Daniel nodded, taking a deep breath. As he stepped onto the stage, the applause was deafening. He looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, others strangers, and began to speak. "Good morning," Daniel said, his voice steady. "It's an honor to be here today, surrounded by so many people who share a vision for a better, more inclusive industry." He paused, letting his words sink in. "When I started my career, I didn't think a moment like this was possible. I was an autistic young man trying to find my place in a world that often felt overwhelming. I faced challenges, not just from the work itself, but from the assumptions people made about me." Daniel shared his journey, from his struggles with Mr. Carter to the turning point when Mr. Brighton gave him a second chance. He spoke about the Spectrum of Success program and the impact it had on Brighton Industries, highlighting the stories of employees who had thrived because of it. "But this isn't just about me," Daniel continued. "It's about creating a world where everyone's potential is recognized, where diversity isn't just tolerated but celebrated. Inclusion isn't a trend, it's a necessity. It's the key to unlocking innovation, creativity, and success." The audience hung on his every word, their expressions a mix of admiration and inspiration. When Daniel finished, the applause was thunderous, echoing through the auditorium. The summit was a resounding success, with several companies pledging to adopt similar initiatives. Daniel returned to Brighton Industries feeling more energized than ever, his vision for inclusivity expanding with each step forward. But as the spotlight on Daniel grew, so did the scrutiny. Critics began to emerge, questioning whether his efforts were truly scalable or merely symbolic. Some accused him of being idealistic, arguing that the realities of business couldn't accommodate such sweeping changes. One particularly harsh article labeled him the dreamer, claiming that his initiatives, while noble, were unsustainable in a cutthroat industry. Daniel read the piece late one night, his chest tightening with frustration. He knew his work wasn't perfect, but he also knew it was making a difference. The next morning, Daniel brought the article to Lisa. "Do you think they're right?" he asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "Am I just dreaming?" Lisa looked at him, her expression firm. "Daniel, the only people who criticize dreamers are those too afraid to dream themselves. What you're doing isn't just a dream, it's a vision. And it's already changing lives. Don't let them make you second-guess that." Her words reignited Daniel's resolve. He decided to use the criticism as fuel, pushing himself to refine and expand his initiatives even further. Meanwhile, at Brighton Industries, Mr. Carter began to show a surprising shift in attitude. After months of observing the positive changes within the company, he approached Daniel with an idea. "I've been thinking," Mr. Carter said one afternoon, standing awkwardly in Daniel's doorway. "I know I've been resistant to some of your initiatives in the past, but I've seen the impact they've had. And I want to help." Daniel raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Mr. Carter hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I want to start a mentorship program for managers. Something that teaches them how to lead with empathy and support their teams effectively." Daniel was taken aback. This was the same man who had once dismissed him without a second thought. Now, he was offering to champion the very values Daniel had fought so hard to instill. "I think that's a great idea," Daniel said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Let's work on it together." The mentorship program, dubbed Leaders of Tomorrow, became another cornerstone of Brighton Industries' culture. Mr. Carter threw himself into the project, surprising even himself with how much he enjoyed mentoring younger managers. For Daniel, it was a reminder that change was possible, even for those who seemed most resistant to it. As the months turned into years, Daniel's influence continued to grow. The Spectrum of Success program became a model for companies around the world, and the inclusion in innovation initiatives sparked a global movement. Daniel received countless accolades for his work, but what mattered most to him were the stories of the people he had helped. One day, as he walked through the office, he noticed a new employee struggling to navigate a complex project. The young woman reminded him of himself when he first started, nervous, unsure, but determined. Daniel approached her with a kind smile. "Hi, I'm Daniel. Do you need some help?" The woman looked up, startled but grateful. "Yes, actually. I'm a little stuck." "Let's figure it out together," Daniel said, pulling up a chair. As they worked through the problem, Daniel felt a sense of fulfillment that no award or recognition could ever match. This, helping others, creating a place where people felt valued, was his true legacy. And as he looked around the office, filled with people from all walks of life working together to achieve great things, he knew that the dream he once thought impossible was now a reality.